Hello, today we've got another great video. We're taking a look at the KingWin CF 012LB computer fan. Let's get right into the data and the graphs. So first up, a little bit of spec information. It's a standard 120mm fan, 25mm thickness. Amperage is 0.19, RPM range goes to 950, decibel rating or noise rating is 19 decibels, and 40 CFM. That shouldn't say pressure there, that's a mistake, I apologize. Air pressure is 0.93, and its bearing is a long life bearing, whatever that means.
Now we're taking a look at the open box experience for the KingWin. The packaging is real simple. It just came basically like that. Obviously I've already done the testing. It has some very basic product information with its maximum RPM, 950, long life bearing, okay, no airflow, noise level, really not much. Alright, here's the fan. First thing to note, it is a 3-pin, so that means it is voltage controlled, which is fine because you just need to make sure that your motherboard is set to power control this fan via voltage control, and then it'll work like anything else. Or you can plug it in via what's this connector? Molex? Is that right? Sorry, I don't. You know, old connectors, it just does not stay in my brain. And it's got this beautiful mustard cables if you're going for that classic look. It's got a square frame. Honestly, it's pretty basic. The gap between the edges of the fan blade to the edge is very substantial. The struts are completely flat. It's got no extra aerodynamic. So this fan is made to be mass-produced cheap. Cheap. The blades are stiff and basic. The housing for it is basic, even like feeling the plastic compared to, well, here's an tool. Like the plastic feels different. So it's made to be mass produced. There's nothing special about it. It's a very basic fan. Let's just move on.
Next up is my case simulation test. The case simulation test can be looked at in a couple key different ways, but for you, the most important is how good is this fan going to be in my computer case, depending on how big my computer case is. So I did 4 key measurement locations, the 6, the 9, the 11, and the 14.5 inch mark. These are representative of small form factor cases that are still front to back airflow. Think of a case that could fit a single 120mm class fan in terms of its length. Then we have the 9 inch mark. This would be like a compact tower, again front to back airflow, and that would be like having 220mm class fans or a 240 millimeter AIO be able to fit in that length of the case without any extra room around it, or a standard 80X motherboard with a GPU of equivalent length. No extra room in terms of that length there. Then we got the 11 inch mark. This would be your standard mid-tower cases, be able to fit 320mm class fans or two 140mm class fans. That would be pretty much what most people would be looking at. And then you have your large tower, something like the Frac Design Torrent, the big one. And that would be like having 340mm class fans in terms of the length of the computer case. So the 6 inch mark, as a special note, also is related to one type of airflow, and that is a bottom to top airflow. So if you got fans that blow up towards your GPU, you'd want to pay attention to that mark as well. So we need something to compare this fan to, and that is where my control fan comes in. My control fan is 3 parts A12X5 to 1 part A14. On this graph, the vertical axis is airspeed, the horizontal axis is distance from the fan in inches. So that would be the length of the case. So you got airspeed versus distance. Also on these graphs, we have the TLG12. It is a great value pick in my opinion. So I wanted something to relate it to. So on these graphs, the closer a fan is to the control fan, the better I consider it. in terms of it being over top of it. If the fans deviate too far below it, I consider them relatively poor performers. So overall, the KingWin here, the CF0112, I'm going to just call it the KingWin, is not a particularly great performer. How about at 100%? Well, it's spinning a full 1000 RPM slower than my control fan, my theoretical control fan, and 500 RPM slower than the TLG12. So, I mean, it's doing okay for its given RPM, but it's just not doing that great overall. How about compared to a bunch of other fans we've tested? Once again, vertical axis is airspeed, horizontal axis is distance from the fan in inches. My newest videos recording right now do have these labeled. I do apologize. I make money on these videos, so it's not really worth it to me to re-record them and redo these graphs. So the KingWin here is kind of below the beaten pack. It does slightly outperform the Wonder Snail at the 14.5 inch mark, so the CF or the KingWin I would probably avoid overall. How about at 100% PWM fan signaling? Well, it's at the bottom of the pack, and it's not doing that great. How about noise versus airspeed? So again, I do apologize, it's not being labeled. Vertical axis airspeed, horizontal axis is decibels. Every 10 decibels is a doubling in perceived noise volume. So 20 decibels is twice as loud as 10 decibels. The KingWin here is kind of off the beaten pack. It's actually pretty okay for the amount of air it's moving at lower RPMs. But as RPMs increase, it just gets noisier and noisier with how much air it can move in a case test. Now on to fan performance through my CPU air cooler. The vertical axis here is airspeed. The horizontal axis on the left graph is RPM. And on the right graph, it is decibels. So at RPM versus airspeed, this is a blade efficiency graph. It is how good is this blade design at moving air. And actually the KingWin's design is pretty good at moving air. It just doesn't have the RPM to move a lot of it. If we take a look at the right graph versus the control fan, well, you can see that it is a bit on the noisy side. It just is a bit too noisy for how much air it can actually move. So how does it compare against other fans that I've tested? Well, noise normalized, it's not going to win any awards for being a good good cooling fan. It's pretty well underperforming. Mind, there are some higher end fans that are ranked very low here. But again, this is noise normalized results at my noise normalized readings, and I do have some caveats for certain fans on here, such as brand consistency with manufacturing. And as the channel grows, I would like to get into longevity testing. So if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe. Think about joining me on Patreon or as a YouTube member. I'm going to get into that at the very end of this video. At 100% PWM fan signaling, well, the KingWin is dead last. Like, I don't remember if there are any fans actually below it. No, it isn't designed for that function, so just ignore it for doing that. And we do see that its performance on the cooler, so decibels horizontal, airspeed vertical, it's just not able to keep up. It's too noisy at pretty much any given RPM. And my last test is CFM testing. CFM testing is my least favorite. I've gone into it on a bunch of other videos, but basically it's only good in terms of a scientific sense for how much volume of air it can move. It doesn't tell you how effective the fan is at moving said air, which is why the case simulation test I feel is much more of a valid test than this, so I don't really trust, in terms of case airflow, other reviewers who only rely on CFM type testing. That being said, I did do the test, blows air down the tube, and you know, the KingWin lines up almost identically with my control fan, and the graph for how noisy it is versus that CFM value cubic feet per minute. It's just underperforming. Let's keep moving on. How does it compare against other fans? Well, it's right towards the bottom of the graph, noise normalized values. So there are other fans that just are significantly better than it. How about at 100%? Well, it's not at the bottom, but it is right down there. And as a special note, for whatever reason, I do find that scythe fans perform very badly in this test. Do not know why. So it's like a false positive for them. So realistically, the KingWin would be placed last here. And now noise versus that performance, it's at the bottom of the graphs. The KingWin here is a $7 fan, at least in the United States. So in this value proposition, it's literally the performance per dollar. So depending on where you are, you may or may not want to consider this fan. And also another note, this fan is not PWM, it is voltage controlled. I do prefer PWM, it's just easier to handle, but realistically for you, the average user, makes no difference at all. So in terms of value, noise normalized in that 6-inch mark, it's actually pretty good because the fan is so cheap. There are better fans like the TLG12, but the KingWin is doing okay. At 100%, it kind of falls behind, but it's still towards the top of the pack. At the 11-inch mark, it's doing really quite well at noise normalized values. At 100%, it's still doing really well. So if you're on a tight budget, it is a good fan depending on how much it costs in your region. In terms of CFM testing, it is ranked towards the top in terms of noise normalized value and even at 100%. As a reminder, value proposition is performance per dollar. This is not absolute performance. It is basically a bang for the buck. So if you're trying to build the cheapest system possible, this is where you would look. If you've got extra money, I recommend other fans. Cooler performance, it's ranked towards the top because the fan is cheap. Even at 100%, it's still doing really well because the fan is cheap. It's not good, it's just cheap. I just have to reiterate that a bunch of times. And that brings us to the end of the video, where this is the raw data. You're welcome to use this data as long as you reference me and my channel. If you're going to use any sort of video, publication, written, or journal, I do have future plans for this. I want to talk about joining me on Patreon, become a YouTube member. I have future plans where I'd like to see this channel go, build a little test chamber to isolate sounds and better microphone, better equipment, buy several fans to be able to test rather than just one sample of each brand. And be able to incorporate longevity testing. I want to buy a radiator so that I can do radiator testing, not just my CPU air cooler. There's just a bunch of things that I want to add to this channel that I'm just not able to do currently because making videos right now is just coming out of my pocket. I don't have sponsorships, and I only have a few of you who are joining me on Patreon, and those of you who are on Patreon, I really appreciate that support. It's actually like helping me right now. So if you want to see this channel grow, think about joining me there. I do have other future plans that aren't just computer fan testing, maybe laptop base coolers and other stuff like that. But that's all kind of where I'd like it to go. And well, I do appreciate you making it this far into my video. And I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you next time here on Computer, Tech, and More.